Somebody drove trucks across my land in the middle of the night. Not once, not twice. 16 times over 6 weeks. Headlights off, diesel engines low, like they thought darkness made it legal. And when I finally figured out who ordered it, it was the woman who ran our HOA, the one who'd spent 9 years deciding that the rules applied to everyone except her operation. I called her, politely, told her the trucks were tearing up my pasture and I needed them to stop. She gave me 3 sentences.
We've always used that path, and we'll keep using it.
Then she hung up. She had an attorney, county connections, a Facebook group, and the unshakable confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who meant it. So I built something she couldn't argue with, couldn't petition against, couldn't charm or threaten or lawyer her way around. What would you do? Drop where you're watching from. Because what happened next, she never saw coming. My name is Everett Strand, 58 years old, retired electrician. I build things with my hands, fix things that are broken, and I do not, as a general rule, start fights. But I finish them. I spent 23 years saving for 5 acres outside Harlan County, Tennessee. Not to develop it, not to flip it, just to own a piece of ground that was mine, a place where I could walk the fence line in the morning with a cup of coffee and not hear anything but wind and creek water and the occasional complaint from a crow. The property sits at the edge of a planned subdivision called Ridgeline Estates. 42 homes, built into the hillside around 2010, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns are maintained within an inch of their lives, and somebody once filed a noise complaint about a wind chime. My land isn't in the HOA, it borders it. That distinction, 4 words, 1 property line, is the entire foundation of this story. The smell of red clay after a hard rain, the crunch of gravel under work boots on a cold morning, the way dew sits on wildflower grass at first light like scattered glass. I knew every inch of that property inside of a week. I walked it constantly. Which is exactly why, one Tuesday morning in late October, I knew immediately that something was wrong. 2 trenches, fresh, 6 inches deep, 40 yards long, running from the gap in my southeast fence, straight across the pasture. The grass was torn back in raw strips. The soil underneath was the dark, damp kind that meant heavy vehicle weight, recent. And hanging in the cold air, faint but unmistakable, the greasy diesel smell of a truck engine that had passed through hours before. I crouched down and ran my fingers along the edge of the rut, still soft, still damp. I followed the tracks with my eyes. They led directly toward the HOA maintenance yard. That afternoon, I called Darlene Pritchett. Darlene had been HOA president for 9 consecutive years, retired school administrator, the kind of woman who showed up to every county planning meeting with a color-coded binder and left having gotten exactly what she came for. Other residents described her privately, very privately, as someone who treated the subdivision like a personal kingdom and the board meetings like a sentencing hearing. I was polite. I explained the damage. I said I needed the trucks to stop. She gave me 3 sentences. We've always used that path. Pause. And we'll keep using it. Click. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Outside, the wind moved through the old oak near the south gate. The creek at the bottom of the property made its low, steady sound. Everything was calm. Everything was exactly as it had been before I made that call. Except now I knew what I was dealing with. I walked to my workshop. It smells like cedar shavings and machine oil in there, the particular smell of a room where actual work gets done. I sat down at the bench, pulled out a yellow legal pad, and started writing. Not a complaint, not a letter, a list. Everything I knew, everything I'd need to find out, every step between where I was standing and where I needed to get to. I've been an electrician for 23 years. The first thing they teach you, before wire gauge, before circuit loads, before any of the technical work, is this. Before you touch anything, understand the whole system. I didn't understand the whole system yet, but I was about to start learning. I didn't make another phone call. I didn't post anything online. I didn't knock on Darlene's door. I drove to the farm supply store and bought 4 trail cameras, solar-powered, motion-triggered, 1080p night vision, the kind deer hunters use to pattern buck movement in the dark, which, now that I think about it, was exactly the application. 48 hours later, I had them mounted on cedar posts at the 4 corners of my southeast pasture, angled to cover every possible approach to the fence gap. Each camera timestamped every trigger event and uploaded footage automatically to a cloud folder via cellular signal. Total investment, $340. By the second night, I had 17 minutes of video I hadn't asked for, but was extremely glad to have. A white HOA maintenance truck, license plate clearly visible, rolling across my pasture at 2:47 a.m. with the headlights off. The driver parks near the fence gap for about 3 minutes, engine idling, like he's checking to see if anyone noticed. Then he completes the crossing and disappears into the HOA maintenance yard. The timestamp glows in the corner of the frame. Green night vision light makes the whole scene look clinical, official, undeniable. I watched it 3 times. Then I downloaded the footage, backed it up to 2 thumb drives, emailed a copy to myself, and started a document log. Dates, times, GPS coordinates of each entry point, description of vehicle, duration of crossing. It was the kind of paperwork that feels tedious until the moment you need it, at which point it becomes the most valuable thing you own. Here's something worth knowing if you ever find yourself in a similar situation. In Tennessee, and in most states, a private landowner can recover compensatory damages for repeated unauthorized entry on their property. In cases where the trespass is willful or reckless, courts can award treble damages, meaning up to 3 times the documented repair cost. The critical word is documented. A timestamp on a trail camera is the difference between he said, she said, and a court exhibit. If someone is damaging your property, document everything before you do anything else. I mailed a certified letter, return receipt requested, to Darlene, to every member of the HOA board, and to their attorney, a man named Garrett Buell, who apparently golfed with the county commissioner. The letter was simple. Unauthorized vehicles have been documented entering my property. I have the footage. Cease immediately. I was now on record. So were they. Darlene's response was not to stop. Her response was to go on offense. Within 3 days of receiving my letter, she circulated a memo to HOA residents, claiming that the access path across my property had been established by continuous community use, and therefore represented a valid easement that the HOA intended to formalize through the county. She CC'd Garrett Buell. She copied the memo to the neighborhood Facebook group with a caption implying I was being difficult and obstructionist, the kind of language that sounds reasonable in print and is designed to make the person it describes sound unreasonable. Within 48 hours, a neighbor I'd always waved to stopped waving. Somebody left an anonymous note in my mailbox. The community needs that road. Stop being selfish. I read it twice, folded it neatly, put it in a manila envelope and labeled it evidence. It was a habit I was going to develop fast. The social pressure campaign was well executed, I'll give her that. Darlene understood something that a lot of people in positions of small power understand. Most people, when faced with community disapproval, will back down before they ever face a legal consequence. The side eye at the hardware store, the silence where a friendly wave used to be, the anonymous note. These aren't accidents, they're tools, and she'd been using them for 9 years. What she hadn't accounted for was that I grew up watching my father deal with coal company lawyers in this county. I know what a pressure campaign looks like. I know the difference between a community with a genuine grievance and a community that's been told what to think by someone with a financial interest in the outcome. I went back to the workshop. The legal pad had more pages now. The manila envelope had company. And somewhere in the HOA maintenance yard, a white truck was getting ready to make another run. The cameras were ready. So was I. Darlene didn't just want to keep using my land. She wanted to own the right to use it, permanently, legally, on paper. And she moved fast. Garrett Buell filed a petition with Harlan County, seeking recognition of a prescriptive easement over my southeast pasture. The legal argument stripped down. Because HOA trucks had been crossing my land for years without formal objection, the HOA had acquired a legal right to keep doing it. Permanently. It's a real doctrine. It exists in property law for legitimate reasons. And Darlene was betting, correctly in most cases, that the average landowner hears the words prescriptive easement and immediately starts looking for a way out of the fight. I am not the average landowner. 3 days after the filing, I got a call from a man identifying himself as a county land use coordinator, a title that, as far as I can tell, does not actually exist in Harlan County, suggesting I might want to cooperate with the community process. Polite, vague, the kind of call that's designed to feel official without being official. I thanked him, hung up, and immediately called a property rights attorney in Knoxville named Theodora Vance. Theodora had spent 15 years fighting easement claims on behalf of rural landowners. She was direct, she was thorough, and the first thing she told me was to stop worrying about the prescriptive easement claim, because it had a significant problem. For a prescriptive easement to succeed, the use must be open, continuous, hostile, and without the landowner's permission for the statutory period. In Tennessee, that period is 20 years. Here's the problem for Darlene. I had only owned the property for 4 years, and the previous owner, an absentee landlord named Clem Harwick, who rarely visited the property, had never formally consented to the truck crossings. Theodora's instinct: find Clem, get a statement. And in the meantime, she needed the full deed history and a license survey. The drive to Knoxville that morning was cold and wet, the kind of November rain that makes the windshield wipers work overtime. Mountain pine and wet asphalt through the cracked window. I was nervous the way you're nervous before something important. Not afraid, just focused. Theodora filed a counter-response to the easement petition immediately, demanding the HOA produce documented proof of 20 years of continuous, uninterrupted use, with supporting testimony from named individuals, and a licensed survey delineating the exact path being claimed. This is standard legal procedure. It's also expensive, time-consuming, and requires the HOA to produce evidence they may not actually have. When someone files an aggressive legal claim against you, demanding they substantiate it with documentation, often costs them more than it costs you, and reveals how much of their case is bluster. The ball bounced back to Darlene's side of the court. Harder. She responded the only way she knew how: by expanding the battlefield. She posted a long message to the Ridgeline Estates Facebook group, carefully not naming me directly. A dispute with a neighbor, she called it, one that was threatening community safety by blocking emergency vehicle access. She implied the path was essential for fire trucks and ambulances. It was a complete fabrication. Ridgeline Estates had 2 fully functional emergency access routes that had never involved my property, but 47 reactions and 7 supportive comments don't require the truth. They just require the right framing. A friend in the neighborhood, one of the few who'd known me long enough to trust his own judgment over a Facebook post, texted me a screenshot within the hour. I read it, screenshot it, added it to the manila folder collection, which by this point required a second envelope. And here's the thing about that. Every overreach, every fabrication, every anonymous note and social media post and fake phone call, Darlene thought she was applying pressure. What she was actually doing was building my case, one document at a time. My workshop was quiet that night, the kind of quiet where you can hear the cedar creak when the temperature drops. I had the legal pad open, the trail camera footage running on the old laptop, Theodora's first memo printed and annotated in the margins. Something was becoming clear. The trucks, the easement claim, the social pressure, the fake county coordinator. This wasn't just about a shortcut across my pasture. There was something else underneath it, something financial. I could feel it the way you feel a bad splice in a wire, not visible yet, but hot. I just needed to find where the current was actually running. The trucks didn't just keep crossing, they started performing. A maintenance crew began parking in my pasture during what appeared to be lunch breaks. Visible from my back porch, fully aware I was watching, not caring in the least. One afternoon, the HOA groundskeeper parked his truck directly in front of my fence gate and left it there for 4 hours, not doing anything, just sitting, blocking my access to my own back pasture like a 2-ton, "What are you going to do about it?" The diesel smell drifted all the way to the porch. I could taste it with my coffee. It was petty, it was calculated. It was the move of someone who had decided that if she couldn't stop me legally, she'd make the day-to-day experience of owning my property miserable enough that I'd give up and negotiate. Around the same time, Darlene used her relationship with a county planning board member to flag my property for a routine zoning review, an obscure but real process that can temporarily complicate certain improvements on a property while the review is pending. Not illegal, not even unusual, technically, but not neutral either. It was bureaucratic harassment, plain and simple, with a paper trail designed to look like procedure. The message was clear: cooperate, or we make everything difficult. What Darlene didn't know, couldn't have known, was that I had filed a public records request with Harlan County 3 weeks earlier. Tennessee's Public Records Act generally requires government bodies to respond within 7 business days. What came back was a stack of documents, most of it routine subdivision paperwork going back to 2009. I read through it at my kitchen table over 2 evenings, coffee going cold, house quiet, the kind of reading that feels like work until it doesn't. Page 44. Buried in the original subdivision plat approval from 2009 was a specific condition attached to the HOA access road. It was approved with the explicit understanding that it would not rely on or cross adjacent private parcels. The county required this condition because they'd anticipated exactly this kind of dispute. They had written it down. They had made it a condition of the subdivision's operating approval. In other words, 14 years ago, Harlan County told Ridgeline Estates they could not use a neighbor's land for access, in writing, in a public document sitting in a county file that nobody had looked at since the ink dried. Public records requests cost nothing and take less than 10 minutes to file, and the documents that come back can reveal a legal history that completely changes the shape of a dispute. The moment I found that clause, the house was so quiet I could hear the refrigerator running. I read it again, then a third time. Then I set the paper down, picked up my coffee, realized it was ice cold, and drank it anyway. Outside, the wind moved through the oak in the backyard. I sat there for a while. Theodora incorporated the 2009 plat condition into a formal complaint to the Harlan County Planning Department. Not just a civil trespass case anymore. The HOA's use of my land was a potential violation of county-approved subdivision development conditions, which are legally binding on the HOA as a requirement of their operating status. One front became 2. A civil suit became a regulatory enforcement matter. These are very different problems, handled by very different offices, generating very different kinds of headaches. It was around this time that Floyd Mahan reached out. Floyd was the HOA board treasurer, 67 years old, retired postal worker, Morristown native, the kind of man who speaks slowly because he means every word. He contacted me through a back channel, carefully, and asked if I'd be willing to meet informally. He said he'd found out about the easement dispute only after it started, that Darlene had been handling it without board votes, and that there were things he thought I should know. I said yes. I kept it off every calendar. 2 days later, over eggs and bad coffee at a diner off Route 119, Floyd slid a folder across the table. I opened it, and the thing I'd been feeling in the wiring, that hot, invisible current running underneath all of this, finally had a name. Floyd didn't say much at first. He just let me read. The folder contained internal HOA financial documents, vendor contracts, payment records, board-approved budgets going back 9 years. As treasurer, he had full access to all of it. And what the numbers showed, laid out plainly across those pages, was something the 42 households of Ridgeline Estates had been paying for without knowing it. Darlene had been directing HOA maintenance contracts exclusively to a landscaping company part-owned by her nephew, Braxton Wiley. 39 years old, operated out of a commercial yard 2 miles from the subdivision, apparently did decent enough work. The HOA paid his company $4,200 per month for grounds maintenance. Floyd, who had spent 3 decades handling logistics budgets for the Postal Service, estimated the market rate for equivalent work at closer to $3,000, maybe $3,100 for a premium provider. Over 9 years, the cumulative overpayment was in the range of $180,000. Floyd set down his fork. Not a single board vote on the renewal, not once. She just kept signing the contract. But here was the part that connected everything. The trucks, the easement fight, the 3A, crossings, all of it. The trucks tearing up my pasture were Braxton's trucks, his drivers, his equipment. And the shortcut across my southeast pasture saved approximately 12 minutes per maintenance run. Over hundreds of runs per year, that translated into meaningful saved labor costs for his operation. Darlene's aggressive defense of the easement wasn't just about community access. It was about protecting a revenue stream flowing directly to her family. The personal and the financial were completely, carefully intertwined. There was more. Darlene had signed the HOA's annual board disclosure form every year, a document that included a direct question about financial relationships with vendors doing business with the association. She had checked no every single year. Under Tennessee's HOA governance statutes, a board member who willfully conceals a material conflict of interest can face personal liability for the resulting financial harm to the association. This wasn't just an ethics problem. It had the shape of something actionable. I sat with that for a moment. The diner was warm and smelled like bacon grease and old coffee. Outside, Route 119 was quiet in the early morning gray. Floyd asked to stay out of it publicly, for now. He had neighbors in that subdivision. He had to keep living there. I told him I understood completely, and I meant it. When I brought his documents to Theodora that afternoon, she went very still, the particular stillness of someone doing legal arithmetic in real time. Then she looked up and said, "This isn't a trespass case anymore. This is breach of fiduciary duty against Darlene personally, potentially civil fraud against both her and her nephew. And the HOA membership has a right to know every dollar of this." She paused. "They came at you with a parking ticket. You're about to answer with a cannon." Here's what made it powerful, strategically. Darlene had no idea I knew any of it. She was still running the social pressure campaign, still telling neighbors I was a troublemaker, still pushing the easement petition through Garrett Buell, operating, as far as she knew, from a position of complete control. She didn't know what was in Floyd's folder. She didn't know what was on page 44 of the 2009 plat approval. She didn't know about Clem Harwick, the previous owner, who Theodora had just located in Chattanooga. For the first time since this started, I was ahead, and I intended to stay there. December came in cold and dry. The creek at the south end of the property froze at the edges. The wildflower field went gray and still, and my workshop, which already smelled like cedar shavings and machine oil, started smelling like something else too. Strategy. A folding table went up next to the bandsaw. On it, the county plat map, Theodora's legal memos, Floyd's financial documents, and 3 yellow legal pads filled front and back. The trail camera footage looped on the old laptop. I had a fresh pot of coffee going at 6 every morning, and I didn't stop until the light was gone. I was building several things simultaneously. The first was physical. Tennessee law allows a landowner to install permanent improvements, fences, gates, barriers, on their own property without a permit, provided the structure doesn't encroach on a public right-of-way. I designed a retractable steel post barrier system using 4-inch Schedule 40 steel pipe. Each post sunk 18 inches in concrete, spanning the entry point of the informal truck path. The crossbar was commercial grade, the kind used on loading docks, hardened steel, rated to stop a fully loaded delivery truck. Total material cost, $680. I built it myself over one Saturday. The smell of concrete mix is sharp and mineral in cold air. The posts went in plumb and true. I checked them 3 times, because I am an electrician and I do not do things twice if I can help it. I installed the system with the crossbar in the raised position. The posts were in the ground, the concrete was curing, but the path was still technically open. I was not done setting the stage. A physical barrier on your own property, installed legally and precisely on your surveyed property line, cannot be litigated away. It can only be negotiated around. Build first, negotiate later. The second thing I was building was legal. Theodora prepared a formal cease and desist letter on law firm letterhead addressed to Darlene, the full board, Garrett Buell, and Braxton Wiley's company. It did 3 things: demanded all unauthorized access cease within 72 hours, provided documentary evidence of 21 documented trespass incidents via trail camera footage, and notified all parties that further trespass would result in immediate filing of a civil suit seeking compensatory and treble damages. The letter did not mention the vendor fraud. That card was being saved for the right table. Theodora also located Clem Harwick. He was living in Chattanooga, retired, and when she explained the situation, he was neither surprised nor hesitant. He had asked the HOA to stop using the path twice, once verbally in 2014, once in a letter in 2017. He no longer had the letter, but could describe it in detail. He signed a sworn statement without asking for anything in return, except that someone finally do something about it. The prescriptive easement claim had just lost its last viable argument. Without continuous, uncontested use for 20 years, the whole petition collapsed. The third thing I was building was a financial reckoning. Theodora contacted the Tennessee Homeowner Advocacy Project, a nonprofit that helps HOA members navigate governance disputes, and with Floyd's cooperation, filed a formal audit request under the HOA's own bylaws. Most HOA governing documents require the association to provide complete financial records to any member within 30 days of a written request. The audit would surface the Braxton Weil contract, the 9-year overpayment, and the unsigned disclosure forms. It would force into the open something Darlene had kept invisible for nearly a decade. HOA members in most states have a legal right to demand full financial records from their association, and an audit request costs nothing but the willingness to ask. Quietly, over coffee and at church, I reached out to 5 Ridgeline residents I'd come to know, people who had privately expressed frustration with Darlene's style of management over the years. I didn't share confidential documents. I didn't tell them what was coming. I just said, "The annual meeting is January 12th, and you should be there, in person. Whatever else you have going on that night, rearrange it." None of them asked why. People who've been waiting for something tend to recognize the signal when it comes. By Christmas week, everything was in place. The posts stood in their concrete footings, cured solid. The cease and desist was signed and sealed. The civil suit was drafted and ready to file. The audit request was officially submitted. I went to my daughter's house for Christmas dinner. I ate well. I slept well. One padlock away from being ready. The cease and desist letter landed in Darlene's mailbox on December 28th. By December 30th, at 11:14 p.m., one of my trail cameras triggered. A figure approached the new steel posts from the HOA side. Ski mask, rubber-soled boots, moving with the deliberate, unhurried pace of someone who thinks they're invisible. They were carrying a bottle of expanding foam adhesive, the industrial kind, sold at hardware stores. Sets in about 90 seconds and cures rock hard overnight. They crouched at the crossbar receiver, injected the foam, and walked back the way they came. The whole thing took less than 2 minutes. By morning, the receiver was completely clogged and the locking mechanism was useless. The path was technically open again. I did not call Darlene. I did not post anything. I drove to the Harlan County Sheriff's Department, filed a vandalism report, and handed the deputy a copy of the footage on a thumb drive. He watched it twice, wrote the report carefully, and thanked me for the documentation. I ordered a replacement locking mechanism, commercial grade, close shackle, hardened case, the kind that costs more specifically because it's designed to resist exactly this kind of interference, and had it installed within 24 hours. I also mounted a weatherproof dummy camera, pointed directly at the new receiver. If they came back, they'd see it watching. They didn't come back. 5 days into the new year, Garrett Buell called Theodora with what he described as a good faith settlement proposal. The HOA would withdraw the easement petition, pay me $8,000 for documented pasture damage, and reroute maintenance vehicles permanently. In exchange, I would drop all claims and sign a non-disclosure agreement covering the dispute and, this was the important part, all related matters. Theodora read it carefully. Then she called me. "All related matters," she said. "That phrase is doing a lot of work." It was. What it meant, translated out of legal language into plain English, was this: sign here, take the money, and never speak publicly about anything connected to this dispute, including, implicitly, the vendor fraud, the overpayments, the undisclosed family contracts, and the 9 years of financial arrangements the 42 households of Ridgeline Estates knew nothing about. Darlene wasn't trying to settle the trespass case. She was trying to buy silence. I declined. Politely. Specifically. Theodora drafted the response, and we chose every word. The week between Christmas and New Year's in Harlan County is the quietest week of the year, cold enough that breath makes fog. The creek at the south end of my property was frozen at the edges, and at certain times of day, the ice looked like hammered silver in the low winter light. I walked the fence line every morning. The ruts were still there, still unfilled, because I wanted a court-appointed assessor to see them intact. I photographed them daily. Evidence doesn't expire. With the settlement rejected and the legal strategy stalling, Darlene shifted to what I'd come to recognize as her third gear: reputation. She began telling neighbors, at a holiday party I wasn't invited to, naturally, that I was being coached by outside agitators trying to destroy the community, and that my attorney was the kind of person who makes a living stirring up trouble between neighbors. She also started suggesting, without stating directly, that my property might have drainage issues causing runoff onto HOA common areas. Completely fabricated. But mud doesn't need to be accurate to stick. Floyd texted me a summary the morning after the party. I read it, said okay, and went back to work. I had 19 new minutes of trail camera footage from the holiday week. I had the vandalism police report. I had Clem Harwick's sworn statement, the 2009 plat document, and a civil suit Theodora could file with 48 hours notice. And I had something else now, something Darlene had handed me without realizing it. The NDA offer told me exactly what she was afraid of. She wasn't afraid of the trespass claim. $8,000 was a rounding error on 9 years of vendor overpayments. She was afraid of the room, the meeting, the neighbors, the moment when the financial documents stopped being my private knowledge and became everybody's public knowledge. She was trying to prevent a specific conversation from ever happening, which meant I needed to make absolutely certain it did. Darlene made one more move, her biggest and her worst. She convinced her contact on the county planning board to schedule an emergency hearing on the community access issue, framed predictably as a public safety matter. The hearing was set for January 8th, 4 days before the HOA annual meeting. The goal was obvious once you saw it: get the county to make a public statement validating the HOA's position before I could bring the financial audit results to the membership, establish an official-sounding precedent, walk into January 12th with county authority behind her. It was a smart play. It would have worked on someone who didn't know it was coming. Floyd told me about the hearing before the notice was even formally issued. Theodora requested to present as my legal representative. Then, quietly, through the planning department's own administrative staff rather than the board member who'd called the hearing, she asked a procedural question: whether the board was aware that scheduling a public hearing on behalf of a party currently in civil litigation with a private landowner might create complications for the county. She was polite about it. She was also precise. The planning staff went very quiet and apparently had a conversation with the county attorney that lasted most of an afternoon. On January 8th, Everett and Theodora arrived at the county courthouse 20 minutes early. The community room filled up, more residents than the hearing typically drew, and 3 journalists from the Harlan Daily Enterprise who had received, from a source neither of us ever identified, a tip worth showing up for. When Theodora placed the 2009 plat approval on the table in front of the full panel, a document that had originated in their own files, stamped with their own office's approval seal, something changed in the room. The county attorney, visibly unbriefed, asked for a recess. During the recess, he had a short, direct conversation with the board chair. When they reconvened, the chair announced that the county had no position to take on private easement disputes, and that the hearing was being adjourned, pending further review of the development record. Adjourned, 4 days before the annual meeting. Outside the courthouse, the afternoon light was already going orange. January light in Tennessee has a particular quality: thin and gold and slightly tired, like it's doing its best. Theodora said the hearing had gone about as well as it could have. I nodded. The 3 journalists were on their phones. One of them caught me on the courthouse steps and asked for a comment. I said, "I just want to use my own land." She wrote it down. It ran in the paper the next morning, with a photo of the 2009 document. The hearing failure reached the Ridgeline board within hours. 2 more board members, beyond Floyd, contacted Theodora independently, asking what the audit had found and whether they had personal liability exposure for approvals they'd signed without knowing what they were approving. She told them the audit results would be presented at the January 12th annual meeting, and that all members were welcome to attend. The HOA had 42 households. The annual meeting historically drew 8 people, maybe 10. Parking had never once been a consideration. Something was shifting. You could feel it. On the evening of January 10th, I drove out to the southeast pasture at dusk. The air smelled like iron and winter grass. I unlocked the padlock, slid the steel crossbar into its receivers, the satisfying, solid clunk of hardened steel meeting hardened steel, and locked it again. I stood there for a moment. The bar was clearly visible from the HOA maintenance yard. Anyone who needed to understand what it meant could look at it from 100 yards away and understand it completely. I took one photograph in the last of the light. I didn't post it anywhere. I saved it for the meeting. That night, in the workshop, the legal pad was full. I started a new one. 4 pages of notes on the order of presentation. What Theodora would cover. what Floyd would cover, the documents in sequence, the footage queued up, the questions the board members would likely ask, and the answers that were already prepared. I've wired a lot of buildings in 23 years, commercial, residential, industrial. The work is always the same at the end. You've run all the cable, made all the connections, checked every junction. And then there's one moment before you flip the breaker, one breath, where everything is in place and the only thing left is to let the current run. January 12th was the breaker. The Ridgeline Estates community room was a beige, fluorescent-lit space in the subdivision's amenity building that seated about 60 people comfortably. By 6:50 p.m., 10 minutes before the meeting started, there were 53 residents in the chairs. Darlene arrived to a room she didn't recognize. Blazer, sensible shoes, her binder, color-coded, tabbed, exactly as it had been at every annual meeting for 9 years. She moved to the front with the particular confidence of someone who has never once walked into a room they didn't control. She set the binder on the table. She looked out at the crowd. Something crossed her face. Not quite recognition, not quite alarm. The look of someone who can feel the air is different without being able to name why. She was about to find out. Projected on the pull-down screen, via a laptop Floyd had quietly set up while Darlene was in the parking lot, was a split-screen image. On the left, a grid of trail camera captures. HOA, a maintenance truck's crossing my pasture at 2 a.m., 2:47 a.m., 3:12 a.m. Timestamps burning white in the corner of every frame. License plates visible, headlights off. On the right, a satellite image of my southeast pasture with the steel crossbar barrier visible across the access path. Solid, immovable, precisely on the property line. And the date it was locked, January 10th, in plain text at the bottom. No narration, no caption except 6 words. This has always been private property. Darlene told Floyd to turn off the projector. Floyd didn't. He explained, calmly and loudly enough for the full room to hear, that as treasurer, he had placed this item on the agenda under a provision of the HOA bylaws, allowing any 2 board members to add items to the annual meeting. He had the bylaw text. He read the relevant sentence out loud. Darlene's jaw tightened. She said it again. "Turn it off, Floyd," he said. "I don't think I will." Theodora stood. In 12 minutes, I timed it, she walked the room through everything. The trespass incidents and the trail camera documentation. The 2009 plat condition from the county's own records. Clem Harwick's sworn statement. The vandalism incident and the police report. The prescriptive easement petition and why it had no legal foundation. The rejected settlement offer. And the non-disclosure clause specifically designed to suppress discussion of related financial matters. She presented it in plain English, in sequence, with documents on the screen for each item. The room was very quiet. Then Floyd took the floor. He presented the audit results, the Braxton Weil contract, the 9-year payment history, the market rate comparison, the cumulative overpayment figure, $180,000, give or take, displayed on the screen in a simple column format. He read the bylaw requiring disclosure of vendor conflicts. He held up Darlene's most recent annual disclosure form. He read her signature and the date. He noted the checkbox next to the vendor conflict question and what box she had checked. Every year for 9 years. The room made a sound that wasn't a gasp and wasn't a murmur. It was the sound of 53 people simultaneously updating their understanding of a situation they thought they understood. Darlene stood. Her voice was controlled. Her hands were not. "This is a private personnel matter," she said, "and I won't be discussing it here." Floyd said, "With respect, it's an HOA financial matter, and the members present are the HOA." From the back row, a hand went up. Marta Joel, 55 years old, 11 years in Ridgeline Estates, had never once spoken at a meeting. Her voice was steady. "I'd like to call for a vote of no confidence in the board president." Under the HOA bylaws, the motion required a simple majority of members present. The ballots went around the room. Floyd counted them twice. 38 in favor, 7 against. Darlene looked at the count sheet for 5 full seconds. Then she picked up her binder, walked to the door, pushed it open without looking back. The room stayed quiet for a moment after the door closed. Then, from somewhere in the middle of the crowd, someone started clapping. It wasn't loud. It wasn't triumphant. It was the kind of applause that means, finally, the kind that's been waiting a long time to happen. Two Harlan County Sheriff's deputies, President Floyd's invitation, given the pending vandalism investigation, had not needed to intervene once. The Harlan Daily Enterprise reporter had everything she needed by 7:15. The story was online before 10. Somewhere in that parking lot, Darlene Pritchett was sitting in her car. I didn't go check. Within 2 weeks of the annual meeting, the HOA board, operating under interim chair Floyd Mahone, voted unanimously on 4 items. Drop the prescriptive easement petition, acknowledge my property rights in writing, commission an independent appraisal of the pasture damage, and terminate Braxton Wiles' landscaping contract effective immediately. The appraisal came in at $9,400. The HOA paid it in full. Garrett Buell withdrew from representing the association and declined all comment. The board filed a formal complaint with the Tennessee Secretary of State's office and referred the vendor overpayment matter to a civil attorney for potential recovery of funds. As for Darlene, she listed her house in Ridgeline Estates for sale in February. It sold in April. She moved to a condominium in Maryville, somewhere with, presumably, no HOA and no neighbors who remember January 12th. The steel barrier stayed. It's still there. It will remain there for as long as I own the land, which I intend to be a long time. Floyd and the new board decided that the damage payment, combined with a modest additional HOA levy the membership approved unanimously, would seed something new, a partnership with the Harlan County Land Trust to permanently protect 10 acres of open land adjacent to the subdivision as a community conservation easement. A real one, negotiated freely, signed willingly, with every party's name on the dotted line and the county recorder's stamp on the front page. I volunteered to coordinate the easement paperwork. Turns out I know something about how those work now. Spring comes slowly to Harlan County. By March, the trenches in my southeast pasture had been professionally graded, seeded, and covered with straw. By May, the wildflowers were pushing back through. Not as thick as before, not yet, but there, determined. One morning I walked the fence line and found a mourning dove nesting in the low branch of the old oak near the south gate. I stood there for a while. The air smelled like clover and turned earth. The creek was running again, clear and fast. The coffee in my hand was still hot. I hadn't thought about Darlene Pritchett in 2 weeks. That, in its own quiet way, is the best outcome of all. Before I go, 3 things worth holding on to, if any part of this story sounds familiar. Trail cameras with cloud upload are the single most powerful documentation tool available to a rural landowner. $300 and 48 hours of footage can turn a neighbor dispute into a court exhibit. The key word is always documented. Verbal complaints disappear. Timestamps don't. Public records requests, county plat approvals, subdivision conditions, HOA financial filings are often freely available and can surface a legal history that completely changes the shape of a dispute. File the request before you file anything else. What you find might save you years. And if you're an HOA member, you almost certainly have the right to demand full financial records from your association. Under your governing documents, and in many states under law, the board must provide them. An audit request costs nothing but the willingness to ask. Most people never ask. Ask. The Ridgeline Estates Wildflower Conservation Easement was dedicated in June at a small ceremony on the edge of the protected land. Floyd spoke. I spoke briefly. I'm not a talker, as you may have gathered. A few of the neighbors who'd stopped waving at me back in November came up afterward and shook my hand. One of them said he was sorry. I told him I understood. I meant it. I don't hold grudges. I hold evidence.
38-7. That's the number. That's 9 years of Darlene Pritchett treating her neighbor's money like a personal account, ended in one room, one night, by the people she thought would never push back. Everett didn't win because he was louder or richer. He won because he was patient. A 14-year-old county document, $300 in trail cameras. A treasurer who got tired of looking away. That's the whole weapon. Petty power always has a paper trail. Most people just never go looking. And that's what stayed with me about this story. How many people get a threatening letter, a midnight phone call, a knock on the door from someone with a title and a bidder, and just phone? Not because they were wrong, because it feels too big to find. Eric was a retired electrician with a legal pad. He wasn't special. He was just stubborn enough to document everything and patient enough to wait for the right room. So I want to ask you directly, have you ever had to stand your ground against an HOA or a neighbor who thought the rule didn't apply to them? What did you do? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If this story will worth your time, subscribe. New episode every week. And next time, a retired school teacher, a property surveyor, and a developer who skipped one very important step. Dallas house sold in April. The barrier still standing. Something don't need a caption.